I'll hand it over to our hosts, Veronica and Dave.
Thank you, Hannah. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this morning. My name is Dave Osborne, and I'm the Vice President with Predictive Success. A pleasure to have some of you join us here today. Some of you on the call, I know we're active clients. Good to see you. And for those of us for the first time, nice to virtually meet you here this morning. We're in for a real treat for the next hour. We have an international consultant and advisor, facilitator, former CEO, nonprofit expert, coaching extraordinaire, Veronica, to share some ideas, some of her shared experiences with her clients and the world of work that she focuses on, diversity and inclusion. We're in for a real treat. Please keep those questions coming. We're also, Veronica and I are both available after our webinar to answer any follow-up questions for you as well. Veronica, thank you very much for joining us here this morning. Let me turn control over to you and take it away.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Just a little bit about myself. In terms of background, I have been in I'd like to say over 20 years, it's probably more over 30 years, but 20 sounds nicer. I have been doing some facilitation on predictive index as well as on diversity and inclusion. I do run my own with small, medium-sized, large organizations, everything from it's through to compensation management, of course. For me, it's all about ensuring that they are through some of the items mean, but in terms of the work that Predictive is involved in, certainly has always been about people analytics and understanding how the
You might be having some technical issues, Hannah.
Yeah,
Veronica.
We have some participants telling us you're breaking up. Are you able to dial into the webinar?
Hearing me now?
Yeah, I just heard you, but you are breaking up when you're talking. Dave, do you maybe want to introduce this part and I'll get Veronica set up on the dialing in?
Perfect. Yes, I certainly will. Thanks, Hannah. So folks, a little bit of introduction to the Predictive Success organization. We're the Canadian business partner for the Predictive Index. The Predictive Index organization has been around since 1953. Predictive Success was founded in 2006, headquartered in Whitby, Ontario, on the east end of Toronto. There are 15 Veronicas and myself working from coast to coast. We've got Michaela and Hannah and others on our shared services resource team based in Whitby as well. Our work really is about helping leaders, managers, owners, nonprofits, for-profit organizations better understand their people to drive business results. We've all got business strategies. We've got business results we're aiming for. A well-aligned and strategic talent strategy is where we play, and we make contributions to organizations to help that be successful. Hannah, are we live back again with Veronica?
Veronica, I just sent you the dial-in number, but we can try again and see if it works for now.
Great. Excellent.
Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. I think my data will hold us for a bit. So
okay.
All right. So let me move over here. Is the screen on at your end or no?
No, we can't see your screen.
All right. Get that fresh.
Perfect.
How's that?
Yep,
good?
Perfect.
All right. So predictive success certainly takes this topic very seriously, and we have our own statement around diversity and inclusion that certainly we're working towards. It is a journey, and as we will speak through some of these items, it does take time, as change is one of those items that helps an organization move through. Now, I do want to share with you this very bold statement that was made on the world stage just about a year ago after the George Floyd murder. So just let me ensure that this is going to come up right for you. And there is no sound, so you will just see the words going through your screen. Now, we certainly know that not every organization is going to be in a position to make that kind of statement, but that is essentially what it takes to put your toe in the water and to move forward in standing up for a principle that you feel strongly about. And so today we'll cover off what diversity and inclusion really means for you. I'll tell you a little bit about my story and why it's important for you to listen to stories like this. We'll just touch on exploring unconscious bias and give you an opportunity to play with one of those. And then we'll leave you with some steps that you can take yourself in terms of leading with purpose towards a more inclusive workspace. So what does diversity and inclusion really mean? I'm going to give you an opportunity to just chime in with your own thoughts around it by responding to a simple poll. And that information is going to be coming up on your screen shortly. You can grab your smartphone and be able to participate with your smartphone. So you should be seeing that come up on your screen just about now. Let's see here. Just there we go. Now you can send your response by text to 37607. First start by texting VUTTON 638 to 37607. You'll receive a confirmation text telling you that you're in the poll, and then you can go ahead and share your response. Or if you'd like to join by web, you can go to pollev.com and enter VUTTON 638 at that point, and then share your one word. So those instructions are right across the top as well. And hopefully we'll start to see your responses coming through shortly. So in one word, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you? All right. We'll give you another 15 seconds to get your word in there. Respect coming out loud and clear, and equality. All right, I think we have just about everyone's response. Thank you so much. And certainly you're hitting on many of the words that come up from time to time in the conversations that I have with individuals. Ah, nice. I see some words coming through here as well. Authenticity. Thank you. So quite frankly, diversity and inclusion is not any one responsibility for, and typically this will want to land with the human resources or your talent management team. This is the responsibility of everyone in the organization because it affects everyone on some level. And so when we take a look at these words, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, we recognize that diversity simply focuses on those differences that we know to be true about each other, whether it's race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, etc. Inclusion is where that individual has been, think of it as being invited to the party, that you are actually invited to that golf course, or you are invited to that particular conference. And belonging is when you have attended that party, or you're at that golf course, or you're at the conference, and you actually want to stay because you're comfortable and you have been accepted for all that you are and all the differences and perspectives that you bring to the table. And it's understood from studies that diverse companies are better positioned to capture new markets because, quite frankly, they're opened up in their perspectives to those markets because they're already culturally competent inside of their organizations. So some of the language, certainly this is not an exhaustive list of some of the language that is associated with diversity and inclusion, but systemic racism, where we're seeing there are policies and practices inside of our own organizations that result in the exclusion or the advancement of specific groups of people. And that simply could mean that there are policies that are preventing individuals who are marginalized from moving through the ranks. Microaggression, this is certainly a part of my story that I will share with you, but a term that describes some level of racism that is oftentimes so subtle that the person that it's being intended for, or the individual who might say it, may not actually realize what they're saying in that particular moment. White privilege refers to the advantages that are taken for granted by whites that cannot similarly be enjoyed by a BIPOC. So there are certain, I'm going to go back to golf courses, you know, back in the day and still today, there are some golf courses where someone like me might not be welcomed. Colorism refers to the preference for a presumed superiority of people based on the color of their skin, and typically within the same ethnic group. And if there are any Caribbeans on the line today, you will know this to be true in that even within the Caribbean culture, there is class as it relates to the lightness or darkness of your skin color. So individuals who are typically at front-facing positions are going to be the lighter skinned individual, and those individuals who have a darker skin are going to be behind the scenes. So a chef in the restaurant is going to be darker skinned behind the scenes. The hotel manager is likely to be lighter skinned because he's front of the house. Anti-racism is the practice of identifying, challenging, and changing those values. So this is the kind of work that companies like the marketing company I shared with you right off the top that are working to tear down and dismantle that kind of thinking, those kinds of values, those kinds of practices. And allyship, again, part of my story that I'll share with you is where there are individuals in non-marginalized groups who ally, who come alongside individuals in the marginalized group and use their privilege to advocate for them, to give them access to perhaps opportunities they might not normally have access to. And BIPOC simply is that acronym for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. So how does diversity and inclusion hit your bottom line? Why does it matter to you, or why should it matter to you? It is critical to all of these aspects of your work, the work that your employees will do and what your company will be probably wanting to do. In terms of productivity, when you bring together different people, different perspectives, you're getting different levels of productivity because there are different thought patterns that are going on. As it relates to creativity, again, because of the different experiences, the different perspectives, the different ways of doing things here in North America, we tend to think that there's only a North American way of doing things. I've had the privilege of traveling to different continents, and certainly there is plenty to learn in the business world from countries outside of North America. Employee turnover is managed in a more productive way when you are pulling from a wider pool of individuals that you can attract to your organization. In terms of profitability, when individuals look into your organization and can see themselves in the services that you offer or the products that you sell, there's more likely that those are going to be available to a broader audience. Something as simple as a Band-Aid that might not be the right shade for an individual can be part of your profitability. There's a young lady here in Toronto who has just started her own Band-Aid organization because she recognizes that this has been a gap in the marketplace to offer Band-Aids of varying shades. Your company reputation is certainly something that the millennial generation is paying attention to. Millennial generation has grown up in diverse school settings, and their expectation is they will see that same diverse setting when they step into an organization. And according to ZipRecruiter, 86% of job seekers are saying that diversity is important. And so they're actually expecting it from their future employer. And certainly employee engagement opens up opportunities for us to learn from one another, to create more trusting relationships, and for, again, that greater level of productivity to occur. And so all of these are interdependent for the organization when conscious effort is placed into focusing on creating a more diverse and inclusive organization. Now, long term, because as I mentioned off the top, change takes time, but over time, just like how the wealthy barber tells us, when we invest our money over time, it will double. Similarly, you will see these kinds of dividend returns to the organization over time in terms of your investment performance or your return on your sales or those better profit margins. You completed a very quick poll when you registered for this webinar, and these are the results. On a scale from 1 to 5 at my workplace, I feel that I can be my authentic self. And this is that sense of belonging, that I can wear my hair the way my hair was meant to be worn, that I can wear my traditional garb to work and not feel as though I'm out of place. 74% of you are saying you strongly agree or agree to that statement. But there are 26% who are not feeling that they can go to work as their authentic self. And the second question, on a scale from 1 to 5 at my workplace, I can voice contrary opinion without fear of retaliation or negative experiences. So 75% of you are feeling fairly strong that you could disagree with the president and CEO and not have it come back to you. There are 25% who are not so sure that they could do that without feeling or experiencing some kind of negative experience. So we're not at 100% yet in either of those questions, and the change is what's needed to get us closer to an environment where people can come the way they are, and that people can feel the at ease to make their statements, of course, in a respectful way, without feeling as though they're going to have to walk on pins and needles after they've made those statements. So again, about a year ago, after multiple events that were going on, Emmanuel Acho started a conversation on Facebook as it relates to race and how race shows up in various aspects of life. And this is the whole concept of having uncomfortable conversations, to understand everyone's perspectives in terms to their experience around racism. If you haven't seen or heard of this series, it's definitely one that you want to check out, because he simply creates this space where individuals can actually talk about a subject matter that they've not had the opportunity to talk about. So just a little bit about me and my story. This is my 5-year-old self when we came over from England to Canada. And certainly as a 5-year-old coming into a predominantly white neighborhood. If anybody knows the Toronto area, I grew up in the Fairview Mall area. That was my old stomping grounds. Henry Farms was the little subdivision. And at a moment in grade 2, our teacher, Ms. Bacon, asked us to bring any item that we wanted to bring in for show and tell purposes. And so I brought my school photo from England. We wore uniforms, but that day we could wear whatever we wanted to wear. And so I gave my story and how I went to school in England and came to Canada. And at the end of it, of course, students were allowed to ask questions. And one boy put his hand up. I won't repeat his name for fear that he may be in the audience one of these days, but he said, "You look like a monkey." And that for me was my first experience of white supremacy at school, a place where you're supposed to feel safe, where you're supposed to experience things in a way that you feel protected. In the workplace, certainly I had opportunity to work in progressively more senior positions. I started out at Heart and Stroke as what was called a personnel assistant back in the day, and worked my way up to interim VP of HR. Similarly, went across to UNICEF Canada and started their HR function as the director HR. Now, while I was at UNICEF Canada, and back in those days, we did not have Zoom, we did not have Teams where we could create relationships visually the way that we are able to do this today. And so we created relationships through telephone conversations and through email. And there was one individual in particular that I had struck a really good relationship with, and she was in Quebec. One day when she came to the office at UNICEF, she was there for meetings, and I was in my office doing work at the time. And I could hear, footprints coming down the hallway towards my door, and my name was actually outside the door on the wall. She knocked on the door and she said, "Is Veronica in today?" And I turned to her and asked her if Veronica was expecting her. And she said, "No, I'm in the office." And I thought it would be just great to come and put a face to a name because we've been talking and I've just never met her. And I said, "What do you think Veronica would look like?" And in that moment, she recognized my voice and said, "I thought you were blonde and blue-eyed." And in that moment was a microaggression that I had experienced. Didn't matter that I was director of HR, didn't matter that I had gone to university. It couldn't possibly be that someone like me could be in a senior role. Fast forward to just last year, I was out for a socially distanced lunch with a girlfriend of over 40 years. And as we were walking along the boardwalk and chit-chatting about events of the day, she actually said, "But I don't see your color." And I thought, in 40 years, I had never had a conversation about race with this friend. And I said, "But if you don't see my color, you can't possibly understand what it's like to live in my shoes." And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "You have a son. I have a son. When you hand over your keys to your car for your son to take it out, what do you tell him?" And she looked at me and she said, "Well, just be careful." And I said, "I have to have a very different conversation with my son." And I explained to her the conversation that I had to have with my son in terms of keeping him safe so that he could get back home the way he left. And for her, that was news. So again, it's a recognition that that colored blindness does matter because we do live and walk our lives very differently. Now, the good news is along the way, I had allies, and these were my allies growing up through my positions at UNICEF and Heart and Stroke Foundation. Rick Gallup, premier marketing guru that left packaged goods and came into Heart and Stroke and turned Heart and Stroke Foundation into a multi-million-dollar marketing machine. And he had the faith in me to, put me into that senior HR role, where I then had to stand up in front of a board of director of 33 older white men to present the HR budget. Duncan Campbell at the time was the chair of the HR committee. And he took me under his wing in terms of teaching me the ropes around compensation because he himself was a longtime hay specialist. And of course, Dave Leahy was my, I'm going to say, loudest champion from back in the day when he, first met me and understood my style. For anybody that knows Predictive Index, I'm an individualist, and individualists don't really do well in traditional work, but there I was in a traditional opportunity, and he often gave me the encouragement to sort of step out on my own. And oftentimes I get the question, well, why are your allies these older white men? And I say, because there were no people that looked like me when I was coming up in human resources. I would step into HRPA conference every year. I would look around to see if there were any other senior women of color, and there were none in HR, and there were no senior male men of color. So these were my mentors along the way. Now, when we take a look at unconscious bias, because it lives in all of us, it's how we see things, how we interpret, and how we then carry ourselves in conversations or even in decisions that we make in the workplace. And so conformity bias is simply going along to get along. You hear something, you see something that you know is questionable or inappropriate, but for fear of ruffling feathers or perhaps for calling someone out, we stay quiet. Halo bias is that circumstance where you know that an individual has done well in one particular role. And so in your mind, you make that assumption that if I put them into another role or if I promote them, they will do just as well, right? So it's that bias that you carry that just because they were good in one area, they will assumedly be good in another. Confirmation bias is, and for those of you who are recruiters, you may have actually experienced this yourself when you're having a conversation with a candidate and they show you or tell you something about themselves that might be negative or might be positive, and then you use a follow-up question to help confirm that positivity or that negativity. So for instance, if that individual was late to their appointment, you will find ways to confirm that they are always late. Similarity or affinity bias is essentially perhaps referring a job out to people that look like you, that go to your same church, that play tennis at your tennis club, because your network is tied to certain aspects of your life, and those individuals are going to be similar to who you are or similar beliefs in your beliefs. Horn bias is the opposite of halo bias in that you will find an individual or you will have a particular position about a young Black youth in a hoodie. Can't be good news. And so you think to yourself, can't possibly bring a young Black youth with a hoodie into our organization because that will just be trouble. That's horn bias. Contrast bias is when you are comparing almost apples to oranges. And so an individual, let's say, who is taking a look at the aerospace industry is then making comparisons to something in the packaged goods industry. Very different, and you can't really compare those two individuals or those two circumstances. So unconscious bias is steeped within who we are and how we operate. It's hardwired into the way we see and make our own commentaries and perspectives about other individuals. And it's the recognition of understanding that it does bubble to the top. And we do have to put measures in place to deal with them. So I'm going to give you an opportunity just to think about how similarity bias can creep into the decisions that you make. So if you happen to have a sheet of paper in front of you or your smartphone where you can jump into your notepad application, I want you to take a minute just to jot down your top 5 trusted colleagues or advisors, those that you would those are your go-to individuals. You've got a position that's available. You've got a challenge at work that you need some input from. Your top 5. And after you've got your top 5, take note of any similarities around gender, age, race, education. And are you seeing any patterns? Would love to hear any comments in the chat box from any of your own patterns after having completed that activity. Anybody's willing to share. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks, David. Only one, okay. All women. Okay, so you can see that similarity bias at work simply in that one exercise. And that's how it creeps into the decisions that we make in the workplace. Conformity bias is another one of those that often comes up in the workplace. And this is that road to Abilene where we simply go along to get along. And this was a real experiment where individuals were asked to look at the lines on the image to the right and flag the matching line in exhibit 1 and 2. One participant was told to share her perspective on the matching lines. The other was told to give the wrong answer and in front of an audience. So when the audience showed disagreement with the participant that was told to give the wrong answer, they changed to their answer, right? So that's the power of conformity. That's the road to Abilene, simply to go along to get along. So how do we manage all of this? At Predictive Success, we have been working with people analytics for the last 60 plus years. And in doing so, we've created opportunities for organizations to just focus on what's important in understanding behaviors around an individual rather than simply the individual themselves, and bringing that information together in terms of a behavioral assessment or a cognitive assessment or a job assessment allows you to focus on the data that you're reading and not the individual that comes with it. We recognize that the whole person shows up for work. But what we want to do is not get into those biased perspectives, but take a look at things that allow you to focus on clear criteria having to do with what's required behaviorally in order to perform the role. Now, some of the things that you can begin to do in the organization is to pay attention to what's going on around you. And I love this quote from a colleague of mine: the behavior that we walk past is the culture we enable, right? If we're not willing to call out that bad behavior, it continues and we're actually endorsing. So in terms of leading with purpose, and this is part of the training that we do with other organizations, we get really deep into these aspects, is creating opportunities where you can listen to the stories. So similar to the story that I shared with you, how often do you hear these stories? Do you listen to them? Do you invite opportunity to have coffee with someone that's different than you to listen and understand where they're coming from? Within your organization, you can engage these kinds of conversations in structured ways. So by giving opportunity for employee resource groups, or for inviting individuals that would not be normally invited to speak on a particular topic, or to help with a decision that's being made, or to brainstorm ideas around a new product. In terms of embracing, you've got to acknowledge that racism exists in your organization. As difficult as that might be to acknowledge, it is there. It is steeped in policies, it is steeped in practices, and it is steeped in behaviors inside of your organization. And you have to get to a place where you acknowledge that it's there, and then you do something about it. You make meaningful plans to remove those barriers that are getting in the way of an inclusive workforce. And it's all about promoting a diverse mindset, because one policy on its own will not shift behavior. It is steeped in your culture, it's about your values, and it's about taking one step at a time in understanding what's there versus, where you'd like to be. And so recognizing that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a destination. You're not going to get there and then be able to wash your hands and say, we're done. It is a journey. We've got to recognize that it has taken over 400 years to get to where we are today in terms of how certain regulatory aspects are being shifted, the movements that are going on with Black Lives Matter and other organizations that are profiling these kinds of issues on a day-to-day basis. Predictive Index, our offices in Boston, have recently launched Change at Work. And it's an opportunity for you to, I think my colleagues will be able to drop the URL where you can go and check out the information that's available, so that you can begin to make these small adjustments in your organization that focus on inclusivity, that focus on empowerment of your employees, and that focus on ensuring that first lens is brought into the organization in terms of how work is done, how decisions are made, how employees are actually employed. And I'm happy to take any questions that you have at this point.
All right, thank you, Veronica. Just a reminder to all of the attendees here today, please drop any questions you might have in the Q&A while we just get started here, but we do have a couple great ones that came in during the session. So Veronica, our first question is, do you have any tips for recruiting for diversity when your company is located in a primarily white city and you don't have the funds to offer relocation? Do you think, given your HR background, that the future of work and remote work will help with this issue?
I heard the last part.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, you were breaking up a little bit. So do you mind just repeating that for me?
Yeah, of course. Do you have any tips for recruiting for diversity when your company is located in a primarily white city and you don't have the funds to offer relocation?
I would say start by, I hear you say that you work in a primarily white city, but I'd say start by understanding what diversity there is, because there typically is more of it than you would think. So I would start by understanding those demographics, recognizing that when you do advertise, and assuming that you advertise virtually, so with job boards on your website, with social sites, you are bound to reach individuals who are going to be, well, assuming how you actually create your posting and where you place those advertisements is probably an area that you would want to check into as well. So are you advertising in primarily white trafficked social sites? So are you opening up even where you post your positions to non-traditional places? I mean, those are two easy starts in terms of understanding where you are traditionally posting versus where others who are different might be hanging out. So if you're interested in attracting individuals from different ethnicities, you have to understand where they are. Are there associations that they would be members of? Are there particular social sites that they would visit more often than not, for instance, to help expand your network? Now, in terms of dealing with relocation, I will tell you that most individuals who are interested in opportunity will often forego, I'm going to say, traditional relocation support. You've got to get creative with what you can offer to attract individuals to those roles. Hope that's helpful for you.
Great. We did have someone ask a question as you were answering that. So just jumping off of that, do you have any recommendations around working through language barriers and the speed which they can learn because of that barrier?
And the speed at which they can learn because, sorry, Hannah, I lost you there.
Because of their language barrier, the speed of which they can learn because of the language barrier.
Well, certainly through COVID, we've learned that people have picked up different hobbies. One of them has been learning languages, and it's because there are a lot of free or low cost applications like Duo. And if an individual is capable of doing the work, but has the language barrier to articulate, there's opportunities to close the gap with language applications, with English, if it's English that needs to be learned, ESL courses that can be taken. So there's opportunities to close the gaps. It's simply, if you think about accommodations in a very wide definition, this is simply another accommodation that you are taking a look at. How can you help this person? How can you accommodate them? By bringing in an interpreter, by having that individual use a translation mechanism to help them articulate. I mean, Google Translate has been around for years, and it helps students in their ability to be able to work in cross-cultural projects. I teach in my other life, and so these kinds of applications, these kinds of tools exist to help close these gaps. So it's not insurmountable. It's about thinking outside of your traditional box and finding ways to close these kinds of gaps.
All right. We do have another one. Kevin says, how do I, a middle-aged privileged white guy in a leadership role, ask about a person's background from a place of respect without committing a microaggression? In other words, how do you celebrate diversity and not ask about it in the workplace?
Ask about a person's background without committing a microaggression. You have to sit with an individual over coffee, over lunch, in a setting that takes you away from the workplace. That's when you get to know someone. That's when you have an opportunity to explore a person's background without it becoming or turning into a microaggression. Now, to ask somebody simply tell me about your background, there's no harm in that. If you at the office want to be able to understand the different cultures that are in your organization, something very simple that we used to do at UNICEF was, and it may or may not be popular today, but we did potluck lunches, and individuals brought dishes from their ethnic backgrounds. And that was one simple way of first getting to know the cultures within your organization, and then giving a person an opportunity to speak about the dish, the culture, where they came from, why this particular dish was of significance to their culture. So again, there are ways to do this in a way that's inviting, and that is going to be in an approachable way where a person can feel comfortable to have a simple conversation. And usually when you take it outside of a boardroom, right, when it's over coffee, when it's over lunch, it's a very simple, easy, relaxing conversation to have. So it does not need to have structure around it.
I love that idea. Okay, we do have another one. So I am in a situation at work where inappropriate comments and jokes are made by leadership in private team settings, often only when white employees are present. Everyone on the team tends to laugh nervously rather than stand up and say something. Do you have any advice for folks like myself who do not want to be part of the problem?
Again, I heard bits and pieces of that, Hannah.
I will, Michaela, I'm going to send this question to you so that you can ask it. Sorry about that, Veronica.
No problem.
Okay, Michaela, I've sent the question to you in the chat. If you could just read that out loud for Veronica.
So the question was, I am in a situation at work where inappropriate comments and jokes are made by leadership in private team settings, often only when the white employees are present. Everyone on the team tends to laugh nervously rather than stand up and say something. Do you have any advice for folks like myself who do not want to be part of the problem?
It takes a lot of courage for you to be able to stand up and say something. And so you as an individual have to come to terms with the consequence that might occur when you challenge these individuals. And you yourself have to, I'm sure you've heard this term before, is you've got to do the work yourself to recognize why you wouldn't stand up and question what you're hearing. This is a personal journey that you yourself would have to walk through, because certainly there could be consequence for you to say something, and that may be your fear, is that there would be consequence. So it is an issue. It is a question that you're going to have to work on within yourself to understand what's preventing you from taking that step.
We do have one last question, Veronica. And that last question is, how do you get leadership to realize that there are issues that need to be addressed when their own lived experience makes them think everything is great within their team? How do you get your leadership team on board?
Sometimes you have to, there's a saying that sometimes you have to leave an organization to grow. I'm not suggesting that that's what you need to do, but if your senior leadership team is not in their own space where they have recognized that their behavior is inappropriate, it's likely that you're going to have difficulty shifting their behavior. And so you're going to have to make a decision as to whether that environment is still aligned with your values.
Great. Veronica, I think that is all the questions we have in the Q&A. So just before I hand it back to you and Dave, Veronica, thank you so much for your time this morning and for sharing your story with us. Dave, I'll hand it over to you to close us out.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, team. And thank you very, very much, Veronica, for sharing your ideas, your wisdom, your thoughts, your advice. A real pleasure speaking for myself. I've learned so much here this morning, and I think I would speak for most people on our visit this morning. We've learned from this presentation this morning. We want to thank you very much. And folks, thank you for joining us here at Predictive Success for this webinar. Veronica, myself, most especially Veronica, are available to answer any further questions as a result of this webinar. Thank you very much. Check out our website for upcoming sessions. Hannah, Michaela, thanks for getting us all here today and helping us out with the technology. We hope all of you have a great rest of your week, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.